Today's topic in general is about the secrets that I've learned as it relates to just directing in general. And of course, we all know that directing is a huge encompassing part of filmmaking. So I'm doing some additional talks next week, week after, and in future weeks about specific areas within directing. So today what I'd like to do is focus on some of the sort of essential fundamentals of directing. And then in the coming weeks, we can identify sort of like the specific things. Like for instance, in a week or two, I don't remember what it is, I'm going to be talking about directing sex and violence. So that's a specific, unique area of conversation that I don't really want to get into today. I want to get into sort of the more fundamental basics and the overview of some of the secrets that I've learned along the way that I didn't learn in film school and that I didn't learn in any kind of textbook and that I did put in my book, Filmmaking Confidential. Doug, do you have your copy handy? Which is available now on Amazon and Audible if you like audiobooks. If you get it and post it and tag me, I will send you a free HD download of one of my films so that you can watch them. And it could be one that you've never seen, or it could be your favorite of the ones you have or something like that. The basic thing that I want to start with, to be a good director, does anybody want to take a stab at what you think it means to be a good director first, before I tell you what I think it is? Anybody? Okay, well, here's what I think it is. So to be a good director, I think the number one rule is to be an effective communicator. And I'm going to tell you a secret about communication that may blow your mind and it may not. I know that Lynn has heard this because, and Stephanie, I think maybe you have too, because I've talked about it in a couple of other talks. And in one of the workshops that I teach, I typically have this in there. And it is, first, the idea of communication. If you think about just what it is in general, the true meaning of communication is what the other person hears. It's not the words that you're saying. It's not what's coming out of your mouth. It's not what you mean to say. What might be in your head may not be coming out of your mouth. So the other person has no idea what it is that's in your head. They're not psychic. Even if they say they are, they're not. And typically, even the great psychics still might have a little trouble with, totally knowing for certain what it is that's in your head. Okay. So my brother, for instance, used to, I don't know if he does so anymore. You have the thought up here. It's crystal clear. I know exactly what it is that I'm thinking. So you should too, because I know it so well that no matter what I say, it's clear, it's obvious. But the truth is, it's not, unless I do a really good job of communicating that. Then maybe you might make a little bit more sense of it. But communication, that's just one part of it. It's about what the other person hears. It's about what they take in. I also like to use the analogy of it being like another language. So if I speak very little French, but some, and I'm in France at a restaurant, I might be able to order my meal and have that situation be okay. But it's at such a limited input for me that I may not have a full idea of what it is that we're communicating. But the basics are covered. Thank you, hello, I would like this to eat, can I have the check? Those things. What I'm talking about, when you're directing a movie, can be a little bit like that. Let me, Alex, it would be great if you could mute your microphone. I think Alex is the only one, or is everybody else muted? Thank you. And if you have a question, just holler and unmute, and you can let me know. That's fine. Okay, so there's communication that is, no matter what I try to say, you, the other person, have your own language. Even if we both speak English, you were raised a certain way, you grew up in a certain place, your family was a way it was, the culture around you was as it was. The life experiences for every single person on this planet, even if you're from the same city, the same block, the same apartment building, growing up and experiencing life and taking in information over the course of time builds up the language of what's inside of you and what your language is. So if you're communicating to me about anything, I am taking it in and I am filtering it within my life's experiences. So life, experience, culture, where I grew up, how I was raised, my peer group, the people around me, all of those are filters to make sense of every piece of information that I am receiving from the other person. And if we're speaking the same language, that's the best, but you can still do it when you're not speaking the same language, because if you see someone who needs help and you don't know the words they're saying because it's in a different language, but they look panicked, you can help them. You know that that's help. If they're angry, you know that they're not happy because of the way it reads. But essentially, the trick is in communication to understand the other person's language. So if I knew that this person was taking in information in a certain way, then I could change the way that I'm communicating so that that person can better understand what I'm saying. And that could be totally different than their co-star, than the person on the crew across the room. You know, every single person on your team, when you're making a film project, will have their own language, even if you all speak English. Okay, so that's just the first thing I want to talk about. That's a pretty broad thing, and we're going to get back to it in a minute. If you take up the DNA of communication and what it's made of, it's this. And I'll hold this up for those of us who are visual, because the three primary ways people take in information, now this is before it gets to the filters in our minds, are visual, auditory, and kinesthetically. So if we are a visual person and we take in information visually, the words mean less than the image and what we're seeing. If we're an auditory processor, like my father is primarily one. Lots of musicians I know are auditory processors. They could care less what something looks like. They don't need to have FaceTime. They get all the information that they need verbally. The sound is what it is for them, 100%. And the kinesthetic person is more about feel and tactile. You know, if you're with someone and they put their hands out and they hug you, and it's all about this for them. It's not about the visual or the sounds. It's about the kinesthetic connection. Those are just the basic ways people first process information. And that comes before the filters that we talked about, you know, growing up and how we were raised and where we're from and all of that. So we'll come back to that also, because what I was going to hold this up for those of us who were primarily visual so that you could see it. And for those of you who are auditory or, you know, auditory processors, I will read it. I will explain it out loud. And for those of you who are kinesthetic, I would say just reach out and just touch touch it. Touch your screen or something. Okay, so this is it, and I'll hold it up again in a minute because I want to read it before I try to make it sense with focus and all that. Communication is 7% words, 38% tonality, and 55% physiology. That's the DNA of communication. And I'll read this again. 7% words, 38% tonality, and 55% physiology. Now, if you stop and think about that for a minute, it will make everything in the world make sense. Okay, almost everything. Not everything, but damn near. If communication is only made up of 7% words, those words really better be the best words you can use, because 93% of meaningful communication is unconscious. And it explains why when you are texting someone or you're reading an email, how sometimes miscommunications can happen so fast you have no idea how it happened. And that's because 93% of that communication was not communicated. It was held away somewhere. So this doesn't seem like it's about filmmaking right off the top of your mind, but as we continue talking about it, it's going to make more and more sense. Because if I look at you and say, and this is a really general thing, if I look at my camera guy and I say, make it pretty, well, there's millions of definitions of the word pretty. And his definition of the word pretty is probably not the same as mine. And even if he made something that was so pretty, and it's still pretty, it's maybe probably not what it was that I really meant to say. But the word that I used was general enough that it might have led to the miscommunication with the camera guy. So it's really important for me then to say, well, excuse me, if you want to have whatever it is that you're picturing, specifying that as best you can, being as specific as possible, is often the best way to communicate what it is that you're talking about. Because the other person isn't going to know exactly what you mean unless you are very, very specific. And even then, when you're in the idea of communicating, and you remember what I said earlier about, you know, there are visual people, auditory people, and kinesthetic people, and how they process information, it might be sometimes good to have a lookbook. So you have, you know, some examples of what you say is pretty. You know, some examples of, oh, let's make it dark and moody. Well, I mean, give me a break. What are dark and moody? You could go from, you know, a really, really dark horror film that's, you know, not stylish at all the way to Batman, you know, with Tim Burton. And then you go way over there to, you know, a scene from The Wizard of Oz with the Wicked Witch of the West. Well, it's dark and moody, but those are so different. I mean, they're all on the opposite ends of what that means. So you might have a collection of images that you could say, you know, make it like this, and then use the words on top of that. So going back to, again, communication, effective communication is 7% made up of words, 38% tonality. And tonality, I mean, is voice, tempo, you know, whether you're speaking fast or slow, the timbre, the quality, whether it's raspy or crisp. You know, if I say, hey, how's it going? You know, I was over there. You might get what I said, but if I said, hey, how is it going? You know, and I'm enunciating my words. That's a clearer way of communicating than if I'm mumbling around. Volume is another part of tonality. You know, if you walk into a room and someone says, how are you doing? And they, you know, if I say, hey, how's it going? And they say, fine. Well, you know, they're not actually doing fine because the word fine was only 7% of that communication. The tonality, being 38% of that communication, told me another story. And then the physiology of their face told me another part of that story. So the whole picture of the 100% of communication from that person just told me, it spoke to me, and I interpreted it as this person is not fine. So 55% physiology, posture, facial expression, gesture, breathing. And if we want to, I'm going to go a little advanced here before we go back into the sort of general idea of what is directing, because I think the most effective part of being a good director is knowing how to communicate effectively. And so I wanted to start here today. And for those of you who came in late, that's what we're doing. I'm talking about the meaning of communication and how if you can be a specific and good and effective communicator, that's going to mean more to directing a film with your crew and your cast and each other and interactions with everything that happens on every day on set or in pre-production or whatever. That's going to mean more than any film school you've been to, however many movies you've made, whether you've got $1 million or $10. That's going to be the most important part of all of it. And it's the one thing that they don't teach you anywhere. I mean, here I'm teaching you, but typically in film school, they don't. Because I didn't learn it until I got out of school. And then I started implementing it and realizing this along the way. I was like, oh, they have no idea what I'm saying. I might as well just be talking to a wall or, I don't know. If 7% of communication is just the words, then the best way to understand the words that you're using first needs to be about what I said first, the other person's language. So if I know that the other person is primarily visual, I might use words like, oh, it appears to me, or, let's take a look at that, or I have a hazy idea, or in light of, or let's have a mental image, or how does that look, see or appear, or imagine this, or let's illuminate on that. They're all words that are visual in nature. And if, let's say, you're an auditory person and you primarily process things auditorily, and the person you're talking to is auditory, you might use words like, well, listen to that, or tune that out, or that's clear as a bell, or I hear you, sort of give me your ear about that. It's all sort of like things that are about sound. That's the language that the other person is speaking. If you know that that's the language they're speaking, then you can use those words. Because if you go into a situation with a frustrated actor or a crew person who needs help on defining something, and they're an auditory person, and you are speaking to them as a visual person, they're going to learn less about what you're saying. They're going to take in less meaning about what you're saying, because it's just not quite their language. They speak English. They think that maybe they might understand what you're saying, but to be even more effective, If you speak their language, they're going to get it even more. You know, they might get 80% of what you're saying, but if you talk to them in their language, they're going to get it even more than that. The kinesthetic person, you might use words like get a hold of, catch on to, make contact, come to grips with, or let's handle that. You know, they're all sort of tactile words, and that will resonate better with them if that person is a kinesthetic person. Now, typically, the majority of the people, and I've studied this a little bit, and I've been to some workshops about this, the more and more Jessica just asked a question. Let me look at the chat. How can you tell what kind of learner someone is? Well, typically people know. If you want to know what you are, you can just sort of figure out by the words that you're using. Now, I know sometimes it's hard because, oh, that sounds good. We all say that. And so but that doesn't mean we're all auditory processors. It just means that it's sort of a common word in language. But if you take just an idea of the predicates that you're using on a daily basis, the majority of the predicates that you're using, especially when you're trying to share something with someone, you can pretty much tell. You can kind of guess. So if your best friend, let's say, Jessica, is talking on and on about whatever it is on a daily day-to-day basis, if you just pay attention to the predicates that that person is using, that will tell you whether they're primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. Now, out of the majority of the populace, typically they're either auditory or visual. Those are the two top. Kinesthetic is the third way that people primarily process, and it's a very small number of people. So it's easier to use auditory or visual, especially if you don't know for sure what the other person, what kind of a learner they are. If you're not sure, just go with visual and auditory. And typically what I suggest, which is a whole other topic for another day, but I'm just going to say it as an example. If you go into a meeting with investors as a director or a filmmaker, and you're looking for investment from 2 or 3 people around the table, the best way to do it is to present it using all 3 primary means of communication. So you're going to have your pitch deck or your lookbook, and all the people there that are visual processors, they're going to get what they need out of it. And yes, Kim, 1 second. And the auditory person is going to be hearing you talk about it, and the kinesthetic person is going to have something to hold. And if you don't want to print it off on paper, or you don't want to go spend the money printing it, you pass around some tablets. Maybe you have 3 tablets that you've rented. So if it's a PDF, everybody can hold it. Because I guarantee you that if every person who's present has something to look at and to listen to and to feel, you have just covered all your bases 110%. So that's one piece of just how to communicate effectively. On set, it'll be a little different, but typically, most actors, on average, I have found to be auditory. They are primarily auditory. They're about the rhythm of the words. They're about the sounds of the voice. They've even over time developed vocal control, which helps them be a character and become something. It's also, musicians are typically that way too. They hear the sounds of the character or the rhythm of the song or the lyric. And a lot of times directors are visual. So you can already see how this creates a conflict, because on average, a visual person talking to an auditory person, they are speaking 2 totally different languages. And that can easily create conflict. I'm going to come back to that. But Kim, what was your question?
Yeah, these are some great points, Steve. I have a sister, an older sister. She's hearing impaired, so she, has hearing aids. And when I was growing up, we always had to use the closed caption, whenever she was watching a movie. So I'm curious. Obviously, she's not auditory, and she can read lips. But would she fall into the kinesthetic learner? Or
she could be kinesthetic or visual, because if she's reading lips, she's probably trained her eyes to see differently than someone who can hear. Maybe.
Okay.
But also kinesthetic, and could be a combination of both. I mean, I have heard that many people who have some sight, hearing, or unbalance will balance more on the other side. So if they take away this piece, then the other pieces are more accentuated. Maybe. I mean, of course, everybody's different, but I would assume if she can read lips, that's pretty outstanding. I mean, typically when we're talking to someone, we're either looking at their eyes, or like Doug and I were talking earlier, some people are so embarrassed to look at each other. They're sort of like looking, like as it appears now, I'm looking on the corner of my screen. If I turn my phone, then it looks like I'm actually talking to you guys. but if I do this, then my face fills up the screen more. Even though it looks like I'm talking over here. I'm off in the kitchen. So does that answer your question? Or do you have sort of a, okay. Because it could be any way. Each person has their own thing. And it's almost impossible. When I first learned this, it made, on one hand, it was like this light bulb moment of how to be a clear communicator and how to be a better director. And at the same time that it felt like it was enlightening, it was also so frustrating, because 90% of the world, of the human being race, are terrible communicators. And if only they knew this, our world would be so different. I mean, it's like the apple and the orange saying that the other one is an apple and the other one's an orange. And it's just, it will never get through, because no one is listening. I sometimes, when I'm out in public and I'm at a restaurant, or, well, not anymore, but before, I would see couples arguing, and I was always really fascinated about it. I mean, on one hand, I was fascinated because, character study, and maybe this is a scene I could incorporate into something or whatever. But I was also just struck by the fact that neither of them were communicating. I mean, they were saying a lot of words. Both parties were very actively speaking to each other, but the other person wasn't listening at all. And part of it is because they were speaking two totally different languages, and oftentimes about two totally different topics. Typically if you're going to write an argument or a fight scene or, disagreement, or if you're going to direct someone to do that, I would, if the actor needed help with it, give them the opposite motivations of what they're really trying to say. So you go to one actor, and don't let the other one hear you, but you go to one actor and you say, what you're really talking here is about whatever it is. Then you go over to the other actor and you say, okay, what you're really talking about is this. And then you find out how it just explodes, because neither one of them are actually talking about the same thing. And it actually helps the scene. But that happens in real life, and a lot of times. So to go back, I'm just going to take a drink of water. One moment. I don't have COVID. I'm a smoker, which is why that happens. So I'm telling you all I'm fine. Okay, so here is, if you wanted to see it, so you can write it down. Is that in focus? I can't quite tell. 7% words, 38% tonality, and The rest is physiology. And if you wanted to also, if you guys email me, I can just send you this too. But just keep in mind that 93% of meaningful communication is unconscious. So when you're having a conversation with someone via email or text, that is the least effective way. That is the least. Yes, I will email it to everybody. I'll just email it to everybody. I'm on my phone, so I can't put it in the chat right now, but I will get this to you guys for sure. And so, yes, absolutely. Email's the least effective. Texting is the least effective. A telephone call is more effective because you're hearing the voice. It's not total, but it's more effective. This is even more effective. You can get a sense of what the other person is feeling. Now, if I had my hands down here and I wasn't moving very much and just sort of then that would be a little less effective, especially because you couldn't tell that I was sitting here twisting my arms in torture, under here. There was one time I did this sort of guided meditation with this group in New York, and the guy who was guiding the meditation actually made an effort to say, "What is your left hand doing?" To the person he was talking to. And the guy said it was sort of clenched, but he didn't see it, but he knew instinctively to ask, "Can I see your hand?" Because it was sort of holding this tension. And once he was aware of it, then he was able to sort of let the tension go. But you couldn't see it if you otherwise didn't know that. If you were sitting in person with someone, then you could see you would have been able to see their hand, being tensed up. So to go back into the topic for today, which is directing film and film directing, I realized that was a really longer part of the discussion than I was hoping it would take. But it is seriously the most important aspect of everyday life. When you guys leave here today and you enter into a communication with someone, think about whether it's just made out of words, whether it's just tonality and words, or whether it's all three: physiology, auditorily, and with words. And when someone refuses to pick up the phone and have a conversation, or when someone refuses to get on FaceTime, you might share this, not at that moment, because they're probably going to fight it a little bit. They won't know. But if you wanted to share this information with them, they might then realize how ineffective their communication style is. To segue it back to filmmaking, has anybody remember seeing, or did they not see, the clips of David O. Russell screaming his head off on set to Lily Tomlin when they were filming? I can't remember what the name of it was, but I Heart Huckabees, maybe? Yeah? Okay. If you watch the documentary that was about the way that I make movies, the second one, I think, is called Wamigo Strikes Back. I actually was able to get onto YouTube and extract them right after Howard Stern talked about them. And I got them before they were banned. I don't know if you can find them now. Surely somebody has posted them somewhere. But it is outstanding. Yes. Okay, Andrew, there is a chapter in my book called "You Don't Need to Yell." I'm actually going to read the part of it, and then the last half of the chapter is what George Clooney had to say about that. Doug has read my book. I don't know who else here has started or not, but if you get it, Filmmaking Confidential is what it is. And the chapter is You Don't Need to Yell. And in fact, I'm just going to read the first part of it. And then I'll move on to something else. I was on a film shoot recently where I wasn't producing or directing, just a fly on the wall. It was really a great experience to observe the daily dynamics of a film set that wasn't my own. I highly encourage everyone who is interested in making movies to visit someone else's set. Whether you are an actor, director, DP, makeup artist, costumer, writer, etc. It's an incredibly educational experience, no matter if you're a pro or a total newbie. And it doesn't matter what kind of a movie it is. The first film set I visited, which wasn't my own, was Sean Penn's The Crossing Guard, starring Jack Nicholson. The second film set I visited was a no-budget indie shoot for a first-time director. Each was on the farthest and most opposite ends of the filmmaking spectrum. One had over 100 crew people, endless trucks lining the street, a buffet of craft service that rivaled the best restaurants, while the other had none of that and just a handful of aspiring production assistants. It didn't matter though, because both had interesting dynamics to study and learn from. This is why I suggest getting yourself on any film set anywhere and just take it all in. Compare how different directors work and how different types of actors work, and do it as many times as you can. It will help you better define how you'd like to operate your own film set. In all the differences, there was one thing I remembered that I'd totally forgotten about. I forgot because I haven't used one in years. The traditional AD, either a first or second assistant director, period. Because I schedule everything ahead of time and manage all the administrative aspects of my shoots, I haven't needed one. I do realize that not everyone is as hyper-organized as me, so you might need an AD or two. And when you interview them, my advice is to keep an ear open to how they communicate. I've never been in a how to be an AD workshop, but something about how most of them behave suggests that they have learned to be stern, mean-mannered, loud-mouthed, and generally petulant or irritating. It is so totally counterproductive to behave that way in a job position like that of the first or second AD. I understand it is important to stay on schedule, but there's no reason to yell about it and to push people around like a drill sergeant. All that does is make people disrespect you. Getting what you want is the goal, right? There are two ways to accomplish that: the respectful way and the disrespectful way. Try this exercise. And I'm gonna actually do it for real. Hey, Doug, could you hold up the book again? Okay, now what if I had said, Doug, could you pick up the goddamn book? Right? And even if you did, you don't want to. You know, so when you're on the film set and the poor makeup girl is working as hard as she can, or it could be a makeup guy. I've had guys do makeup on my sets before. Yelling at them is not going to make them get done faster. Asking them a question in a nice way, such as, I wonder if there's something that I can do to help you get finished in the next 5 or 10 minutes. I'm just wondering. I wonder, is there? That's a conversation. The makeup artist might say, no, I'm fine. I'll be done in 5. I'll be done in less than that. If you yell at them and berate them, not only do they, I mean, they're trying to do the best they can for their job and they want to do a good job, but they don't want to come to work tomorrow. And, you know, it might actually, because they're so frazzled now, they're not going to be able to focus as much. So the actual technical ability of what they're working on, you know, a makeup artist who is shaking is not going to put the eye makeup on very well, right? So you don't, I mean, the objective is, if the objective is to get that person on set as fast as possible, then do your best to facilitate that. If your goal is to be on time and on budget and ahead of schedule and all those things, going about it in the way that will help facilitate that should be the choice you make. By yelling at people and making the working environment miserable, no one's going to want to be there tomorrow. And I don't know how, to go back to the David O. Russell story, I don't know how he kept getting jobs, because if Doug is a great actor, and I've worked with him a few times, for those of you who didn't know that. And could you imagine if I one day just threw a chair at you? I mean, that's just like, and then are the studio executives just totally out to lunch? I mean, I don't know. I have not met the man. Maybe he's quite charming in real life. Maybe, I don't know. I doubt it. Or maybe he's charming enough until he's on the set so that he can throw the trash can at Lily Tomlin. I'm not sure. Maybe she's just mean too. You know, I don't know. I don't have to take his side or her side. Like, I'm just saying their communication style and that what was, I was talking about is different. And George, what is in my book that George said about getting into the fist fight, I like George, but like, I don't know if I'd go that far. Would I hit someone who was assaulting? Probably not. I would probably just move. I would get out of the way. I'd leave the situation. Because the truth is, you can't change someone else. You can only change your reaction and where you are. So if you're talking, and I've had this happen to me a couple of times. There was an actor that I was working with once. Actually, there were two actors I was working with once. They hated each other. They truly hated each other. And, but they were good. They're professionals. And for the most part, you'd never have known. I knew because they both came to me about things, right? But typically, no one else on the set knew. There was one moment on one day that they burst at each other in front of everybody. And it was loud and obnoxious and childish and irritating and totally unprofessional. And I went up calmly in between them and took the responsibility. I said, this is about me, which it wasn't. It was about their argument. But as soon as I took it away from them throwing anger at each other, because they weren't angry at me, they were angry at each other. But as soon as I made it appear as though they were angry with me, they stopped. And then I just said, let me have a moment to figure out what to do. They were arguing about like making the decision, which isn't their job. They could be worried about it, or maybe they're trying to help find the solution. But the truth is, it was my job to find a solution. And it clearly wasn't working for them. So when they got into it and they were fighting back and forth, I said, wait a minute, let me figure this out. And why don't you go over there and take a breath, and you go outside and walk around. When they came back, they did the scene and it was fine. Because they're professionals. I mean, the goal was to do the movie, get the work done. It wasn't to hate each other. There was one other time on that shoot that they kind of got into it, and it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as the first time, but it was one of those that's just like, oh God, here it goes again. But all of those egos, all of the dynamics of a film set, I'm not saying that actors are the ones who are prima donnas. Sometimes it's someone on the crew. Sometimes it's, who knows who it is. There sometimes is an ego or a personality that's very, very strong and very, very assertive, confrontational. And if you can communicate effectively without reacting, it'll be a piece of cake. I mean, I would take a step back, and if it's a film that you're producing or that you're part of the team, if you're the filmmaker who has written this thing and you're going to direct it, then I would say be involved from the get-go in every single person that you are hiring to be on your team, whether it's a crew person or an actor, and really visit about how they process information, how they can communicate. When was the last time they got into a fight? Are they an angry person? Are they a sweet person? get some references from other people who have worked with them and find out what kind of a personality are they. They could be the best actor in the world. They could have won an Oscar. And when they show up on your film set, if you yourself haven't already defined this dynamic, it will soon bury you. Maybe. The person who's won the Oscar is going to feel like it's their movie and they're doing you a favor. And the dynamics of, you know, who's in charge, it just flips instantly. So those are all discussions, I would say, no matter who they are. They don't have to have an Oscar. They could be a person off the street you've never heard of. Have these conversations before you get on set, because oftentimes people don't have them and they wait and they discover, you know, 2 weeks in that they would rather have picked somebody else. And then it's too late because you've got all this footage shot and you've only got a few more days left, you know, and then it's like, then it's hard to finish. The other thing I want to just in general say, one secret to directing, the chapter in my book is called Finding Your Perception. And I think if you go to Amazon and you're looking at like the Kindle, I think that you might even be able to read the first part of the chapter. I don't know how many pages in it goes before it stops. But I think there's part of one. Doug says, have you ever had someone on set trying to direct another actor in the scene of the shoot? Oh, totally. In fact, what's amazing is all actors have a different style. Some of them have this method, some of them have that style, some of them learned this way or this technique or this whatever. And other actors just sort of walk in and do it. There's so many different kinds. And what I found challenging is when you get different types together. So if one person's a method actor and they want to feel how it feels to move from here to the door, and they're going to walk that 10 times just to feel how it is and how long does it take and at what point are the words coming out. You know, they want to do that. They want to actually feel the sense of it because it becomes more real for them. Whereas the other person in the scene doesn't need that. They might just have something else, a whole nother approach. And the conflict comes when the method actor's trying to get the other one to do it also, when the other person doesn't need to. Or, no, you have to do this in order to feel the scene or whatever. And the other person is saying, no, I don't need to do that. And a lot of times, or they'll literally just say, oh, don't say it like that, say it like this. Seriously. I'm reading to Andrew, one sec. My teacher had a guest directing gig on a TV show that was in its 5th season. They spent 2 hours setting up lights and camera with stand-in. When the star came in, she was off her mark one step. The director asked if she could step on her mark. And her reply was, fuck you, move the camera. So how do you deal with with that mentality as a guest director on a television show? Well, typically, I mean, I want to keep this as it relates primarily to feature films and independent films at that. I think when you get into the studio level or at a network level, the job of the director is a translator. I think that the producers are the ones, the showrunners are the ones, the writers are the ones who really are the ones in charge. And from what I've gathered on TV specifically, is that if the director went home, especially if it was a season or a series that had been in the works for more than a couple of years, they have a routine and a rhythm on the set that the directors come in and out all the time. Yet the system operates the same way. So essentially, there's no purpose for a director on these shows because they're just kind of sitting there in the background, which if you don't like doing much work is the ideal job because they're paid really well for just to sit there. But if the director went home, they'd shoot for the day. The camera guys have done what they do every day for 5 seasons, typically. In most cases, that's the case. If I were in that situation and I was working for a network, then I would consult with whoever I had to answer to. If I didn't have to answer to anybody, for instance, if I were the producer or the showrunner of the show, or if it was my film and I was producing, I would have had this conversation beforehand with this person. There is a chapter in my book about when we're doing storyboards and trying to save time on set. I went through every one of my storyboards with Karen Black for my film. She saw all of them. They were sketches. They were pretty elaborate. And she knew which shots were going to be of her, especially. When we get on the set and she didn't like where I put the camera, I simply said, now is not the time for that discussion. But instead, all those weeks ago, that was when this discussion needed to happen. Because now we've already planned, we've already lit, and everything's ready to go. And she was professional, so she just did it. And it looked fine. I mean, I don't know what she was talking about, but you will come into that. You will have to deal with that. But again, typically a mark, if it's, wage the balance, wage the war, wage the challenge. Will it take less time to try to get this person to stand on their mark than it will to just tweak the light or move the camera just a bit or take focus one more measurement? If that maybe puts you behind 20 minutes, it might be better to just get behind 20 minutes so that you don't have to deal with this person. So wage it. If you think that you can convince them and persuade this person to get onto their mark in less time than it takes to just tweak it just a little bit, then maybe you do that. But figure you'll over time, as you've directed more things, you'll get that. I think you'll figure out this is not what I need to be debating right now. Sometimes if it's not about the exact sort of blocking or something specific like that, if it's more in general, oftentimes I have found that it takes less time if the actor has some brilliant idea about, I'd like to play the scene this way, or I'd like to do it this way. I typically say, okay, let's do it 3 ways. Let's do it the way it was written. Let's do it your way. And then let's do one where we're just making it all up as we go. And I kind of twist it into distracting them from their original idea that they thought was better than mine, that they were going to fight me over. And then I added another one, which was, let's do your way. And then let's do one where we're just making it up and we're just being, totally improvisational. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then you just use whichever one you want in the editing room. It oftentimes takes less time to just do a take their way than it does to try to tell them you don't need it. Because the conversation that will then stem from that is, why don't you need it? You're making a mistake. I needed this is that. Da, 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 da. And they will prove to you why you need it, even though you don't. So my advice is in those moments to just do it, especially now because it's, we're not shooting on actual film celluloid. So the cost, it'll take, a page of dialogue being spoken in a take will take less than a minute for them to act, typically. So just throw the extra minute away, let them get what they want. By the end of the day, they'll have forgotten all about that one moment. And then I guarantee you, 3 or 4 months later, when the movie is being edited, they will have no memory of that. And then when they're sitting in the theater watching the rough cut or the cut of the film, they will have total amnesia about anything that you actually did and the choices you made during the process. And in fact, sometimes I have had an actor come up to me to say, I'm so glad you did it my way and that you used the shot that was my idea. And I didn't. But they don't know that I didn't use it. It's just somehow they thought that what it was that I put together was what their idea was. I've also had the case when I've been given notes from friends who are other filmmakers who say, oh, I would do this, 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 and this, you know, and then I invite them to my premiere, the screening, and they see it and they said, oh God, I'm so glad you implemented my notes, when I never did. You know, but it's so funny because people are often, you know, unless they're a part of the process the whole time, really, it's like they're impassioned at the moment in moments like that. But I guarantee you, if they're that type of personality, they're immediately afterwards that impassioned about something else. And the next day they're that impassioned about something else. And they don't remember what happened last Thursday or whatever they were impassioned about. They have no idea. I intended to read more from my book and to talk to you about the specific things that you all need help with. And I want to do both, but what I'm going to do is at this point, just open it up for anybody who has questions that are maybe a specific thing that I can either shed some light on, or if you have any advice you need, or any kind of specific question, and try to keep it primarily about just the from the perspective of filmmaking in general as a director, or about the craft of directing. Lots of good, useful things in my book. I think that the idea and the part that we've talked about most today, which is just the art of effective communication, is the number one thing to know and to take away, no matter what it is that you're working on with anybody. And there are ways that other people don't, you know, they don't have to, you don't have to sit them down and show them the PDF and then try to communicate with them. But maybe you do, you know, why not at the beginning of a shoot? Hey, John, no problem. Feel free, stevebalderson.com. Anytime you need to communicate, I'm here, and I'm there for you anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much. This was great.
Cool. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye, guys.
All right. See ya. Bye. I think I would, actually. I think I would. I've never done it. I typically just operate this way. I've never actually printed up a PDF and emailed it, or even passed it out on set. And I think I will. Brianna, yes, thank you for joining us. I will be available for anything you guys need. SteveBalderson.com, meanwhile, and the book is out on Amazon. Thank you, Brianna. It's also on Audible for those of you who are auditory and prefer the audiobook. You know, there are the kinesthetic people who want to hold it, and the visual people who want to see it. And then there is the auditory person who want to hear it. It feels good, doesn't it? It feels like this sort of like butter. It's crazy. It's really weird. I don't know how they did it. There was one other thing I wanted to say, and I forgot to put it in my book. This one thing. All righty, West, have a great rest of your day. I know people are going to be starting to head out. Oh yeah, go ahead. The question. Midge.
Okay, hi, this is Midge. How are you?
Yes. Good, how are you?
Good. Thank you for this. My question is this. I'm a filmmaker, but also I'm a casting director as well. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do both, so like that I don't have to hire another casting director, because I think that's a lot of money. Totally. But how can you mentioned something about, like, you know, you could deal, like, you know, you might, the actor might be an Oscar winner, or, you know, just an actor, and you don't know about their personality. But when you hire them for the job, would you prefer to do the research about them before you hire them, or after you hire them?
If it's, let's say, a situation, that was a great question, by the way. If it were a situation where, let's say, I needed to get the funding necessary to make this project, and that was my number one goal, and I was given the opportunity to work with a very famous person who helped secure that financing, I might go ahead and for instance, I've heard a couple of people that I know have worked with Barbara Streisand, and while she comes in with her crew and her lights and her thing, and she's telling you how you're going to film her, that might be a terrible situation for a little while, but the truth is that too shall pass. You know, it's like, it might be a really strange working relationship, you know, for 6 weeks. You know, it's not forever, and it might actually help your career. You know, even if you're not so proud of the movie, it might actually open some doors for you. So then I would have a conversation, and I wouldn't let my ego get in the way. I would sit down and say, Barbara, I want to do whatever you want to do, but I need you to work with me to let me do that. You know, there was a story when Karen Black came to our shoot, and on the very first day, she was feisty, and she just wanted this, and this wasn't right, and this wasn't whatever. And as soon as somebody said, Karen, don't talk to me that way. I want to help you. I want to get you everything you need. But I don't respond well to being yelled at. If you just tell me what you need, if I can do that, I'll get it. And she stood there for a minute and then said, no one's ever said that to me before. You know, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. But what I would do in the casting, directing, or casting question was, I would probably do a little bit of research afterwards, call some people that person has worked with, find out how their personality is, and then prepare yourself for that personality type. If you know that they're high maintenance, drama prone, it won't come as a surprise when they are. It'll be something that almost you expect. And then when it happens, it's not a surprise. You know, likewise, maybe you have a conversation with them at first. I will look at Andrew's question in a sec. You might have a conversation with them and say, hey, you know, what's your goal? Is your goal to be flattering? To be looking good on the camera? Is your goal to come off as a really strong actor? Do you have any fears about this project? You know, typically most drama comes from a negative emotion such as fear or jealousy or anger or resentment, whatever. Ask. Say, hey, do you have any trepidation about this? Do you have any fears going into this? Because if you do, maybe we could talk about them. And if I know what they are, and I hadn't thought of that, well, then I can really do that. I can confront that, and so we don't have to think about it anymore. I mean, I think that truly communication is the key to anything in life. If you're afraid of them yelling at you or quitting your movie, then it's not going to work. I had a friend who, well, I'll tell you this story in a minute. It's about a famous rock star friend of mine who, well, I'll just tell you real quick and then we'll get to Andrew's question. Had agreed to be in a movie that someone I knew, I don't think I was friends with, but I knew them loosely. And he was convinced that she was going to drop out of his movie when she found out that she was going to have to be staying at someone's house in their guest room instead of a hotel. And I said to him, well, when do you start filming? And he said, well, like, 4 weeks. And I said, well, would you rather have her show up the day before shooting, find this out, be upset and then quit, and then leave you high and dry with no one to recast for tomorrow? Or do you want to tell her now and find out what happens? Maybe she'll be okay with it. Maybe she'll quit, but hey, you've got 4 weeks to find somebody else for that part. I would encourage you to tell her today. And this was so long ago, I can't remember what happened. I don't remember whether or not she was in it. I don't remember whether he did the thing. I don't remember, but that was a really interesting story that I just thought it's better to just come right out with it. If you're a little nervous about coming right out with it, write the letter and send the letter. If you're nervous about a face-to-face confrontation, do it in a letter and then follow it up with something, and make sure the tonality is there, like we talked about at first. Because if I get an email saying, what's your problems? Tell me all your problems and what's wrong with you, and or I want to help you. If I use the same words I said a minute ago, what I was using just now was a little harsh, but if you use the same words I said a minute ago, you don't know the genuineness of my asking unless you hear it. Thank God for voice memos. Thank God for, do a recorded video. Put yourself on camera and say, hi, I just would like to introduce myself to you. I would like to know your fears. I would like to confront all this. I'd like to put anything that you have, any trepidations to rest, and so that we can do this together. Make them part of it. And if they hear that tonality and see your physiology, they'll probably tell you. Or they're probably not going to have any big thing that they really need. You might find out that they might need one little thing that's no big deal. Typically. Andrew, I'm sorry for the delay. What was your question?
Well, I was just like, because method actors can be really intense, and sometimes it's kind of hard to tap into their process when you're trying to deliver when you want to give them some type of, some insight on what your vision is. Uh-huh. And also, have you ever had to deal with that? And I know that when you're going into interview process when you're casting actors, that you have this lengthy discussion about actors' processes going into roles and how you envision things, because and also there's also improv actors who refuses to memorize lines and just kind of go off script a lot. But there was one time when I was directing a short, and the actor just wasn't buying into my process and just wanted to do his own thing. It was real tough to get a performance out of him.
That has happened, but not exactly. It's been sort of, I would describe that. I mean, I used the word at the time, selfish actor. Yeah. And by that, I mean, they weren't listening to their co-stars. They'd already decided how they were going to play the scene. Right. And then they show up and they do it. You're right. It's really hard to work with those people. Yeah. What did you do?
I just said, well, if you have a process that's your own and you don't agree with the way I like to do things, the way I was trained as an actor, that's fine. But for the most part, he was, I would say, like, it's a saying. It's always better. It's always easier to pull back than to trying to bring an actor to a higher level performance. When they bring too much, it's such a blessing, because you can always just kind of tell them to scale it back. But it was a struggle. I said, okay, and I was just really trying to figure out ways on how I can just make it, just tap into different resources. But other thing, it was tough, and I just noticed that his range was very limited. So I just had to just do multiple shots and just like, okay, let's try it this way. And then the other problem I ran into was, the other actors directing. Of course. I'm like, can you guys please stop directing?
Right.
It was a whole...
I mean, the truth is, and this, you can make the scene work when you're editing it. And if you have one idea, typically, even if they've done something totally different, you almost have a little way you can do it the way you wanted to from the beginning anyway, based on no matter what they did, or get it closer. But then on the flip side, I was in an experience once where the performers were terrible on set, and I was really, really nervous. And then in the scene when we were editing it, they both looked spectacular. And I'm like, I don't know how that happened, because I was really, really nervous when we were filming it. But the other thing is I'm going to read a little bit. It's called Filmmaking Intention, because I think that fits into this. And it's about, well, here, I'll tell you. Another thing I learned in film school happened one day out of the blue. It suddenly occurred to me how to communicate and see something from outside myself. as an observer. I'm skipping ahead. The assignment was to create something horrific. Many students created images filled with frightening subject matters, blood, fear, horror, all the aspects of something most people would agree to usually define as horrific for the viewer. Well, one student returned with an image of a vase of daisies, especially nice looking, tall-stemmed, crisp white daisies, bathed in sunlight on a perfectly nice day. The teacher chastised the student for failing the assignment, but I kept wondering if this vase of pretty daisies wasn't somehow, for the artist, the most accurate illustration of something horrific. In defense of the artwork, the student confessed to the teacher in front of the entire class of having been brutally raped as a teenager. And during the attack, the only item in their field of vision was this pretty vase of daisies. The teacher consoled the student and commended the courage it must have taken to conquer those deepest, most horrific moments in order to create the artwork, but said that it was still a failure. A failure? Naturally, the rest of us spoke up in defense of the abused student. The teacher simply said, think about it from the point of view of the viewer. What does the viewer see? It doesn't matter what the maker is thinking if he or she doesn't communicate that to the audience. The teacher was right. None of us really knew how horrific the daisies were until we knew the whole story. There are a variety of ways the artist in question could have communicated this in a clear way, even while keeping the sunshine and pretty daisies. Maybe add a crack in the vase with a little blood dripping out, or paint the attack in the background hidden in the shadows, so that we don't immediately see the attack at first glance. In this case, the artwork was a disappointment. Although the student's intent was there, the student failed to communicate it. It really taught me how to see something from another person's point of view. So when I'm creating a film, I'm thinking about how the scene appears from a variety of angles. And it's not necessarily my intention. It's what is the viewer taking in. Again, we go back to the beginning of what is the most effective way of communication, is what the other person hears. If I think this scene is terribly funny, and I am laughing hysterically, and no one else is, then it isn't funny. Maybe it's funny to me, but I'm not communicating that to the audience. If the audience can make sense of it, if I am speaking their language, then I will get through to them. Now, oftentimes you can't please everybody. You can't communicate effectively to everybody. There will always be someone who thinks it's funny and always somebody who thinks it's not funny. There will always be somebody who thinks it's scary and frightening and dark and thrilling, and somebody else who has the total opposite response. You can't really think about them. Now, my advice in that would be to just stay true to yourself, but be wary if you're the only one laughing and no one else is. You know, if it's 85% people are having fun with it, that's all you need. You know, don't worry about the rest trying to appeal to everybody. Because if you start appealing to them, then you're going to lose some of the other ones. So just sort of be true to you, be aware of what's going on, take notice of the world around you. And I feel like, thanks, Nick. We'll see you next time. It'll be the most beneficial. I mean, I've made 17 features, and I can't tell you that now it makes no difference. At first, I was kind of hurt when I would get a bad review, until I realized that everybody loved everything about the movie once, and everybody else hated everything about the movie once. So if I tried to appeal to all of those people, I'd be left with an opening credit sequence only. And then even then, somebody might not like the font. So then I'd be just left with a black screen. So if you start going down the path of listening to other people, it's just the wrong path. But I'd still be just aware of what's going on. You can tell as a filmmaker when you're creating something that is speaking to someone. I mean, luckily, visual storytelling doesn't require words. Words can help. But if you're telling a movie without words, that's 93% of effective communication right there. Because, you know, the sounds of the sound effects and music and what you're looking at make up 93% of the DNA of communication. The 7% of communication that are words are beside the point. That's why when you're watching a foreign film, oftentimes you can follow along without having the need for subtitles. Because it's a visual medium. It's part of it. In our last few minutes together, does anybody else have any question or want to bring up something that I didn't cover, just sort of as a general thing? We have future talks coming up on directing sex scenes and violence, on dealing with movie stars and whether or not you need names or not. Lots of things. JC, in what chapter of your book do you speak about the efficient art of communication? I don't say the thing about that I said, 7%. I actually don't give this out in the book. This is one of the secrets I keep that I share. This is the 7% words, 38% tonality, 55% physiology. But as you heard when I was reading a few things, there are that message sprinkled throughout. There's lots of ways to reframe communication. You know, for instance, I say there's no such thing as a problem. You know, the truth is that the only thing that exists is a challenging situation and your reaction to it. But it's not itself a problem. So, Stephanie, do you have a question?
Yeah, is there a general way that you can phrase your request with anybody on the set so that it won't be offensive? I mean, you cover a lot of scenarios about what if you got to deal with an actress acting this way, what about something else? Is there a general rule when you phrase something that so that we know that generally it won't be offensive?
One of the first things I do is to keep a rapport with that person. So I would say right away, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. If you don't understand what they're saying, what I would do is immediately return to them with what they're saying. So you could say, okay, now let me understand this right. You said this, 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 and this. And you just want to make sure that you understand that what you heard was what they said. Do that first, because you might have actually heard them say something else, especially if they had a different kind of tonality about it. So always ask just to say, okay, I just want to make sure I understand. So let me make sure I understood you correctly. Is it true that you said this to me? And then they say yes or no. Then you say, okay, let's, I like to ask lots of questions, because asking questions is the least threatening way to learn about information. But it's also to be on their side. So even if you don't agree with them, even if they're being jerks, just join them for a split second, put on it doesn't have to be too fake, but just say, oh, I hear you. You don't have to agree with them, but I hear you isn't negative. And they might think that you're agreeing with them, even if you're not. All you're saying is that you hear them. So it's like, oh, I hear you. What are we going to do about that? I mean, it really depends on what the specific situation is, because I don't know if that question would be applicable in all the areas, but give me if you could, like an example.
No, okay, so I got to the point where for the split second, I hear you, and then the final thing would be, but you want to do it your way. So how do you clinch it then without offending them, no matter what the situation is? The end game is, but you want to do it your way, you need them to comply.
Well, if they're a good actor, for instance, or could be on a crew person, and it could be the camera guy. Let's say they want to do it in a different way. I would always say, let's do it both ways. We'll do my way first, then we'll do your way. And then maybe, would you be open to doing it a third way also?
Okay.
Oh, you just muted.
So if there's time, you always give that option of giving them that chance of just kind of like working and collaborating with them. But it's not, unless you're just completely dead out of time, then you say, well, we could have done this if this was broached, but since we were running out of time, we just need to finish it and do it this way. Is that kind of how you do it then?
Yeah, I mean, typically I work in just doing it their way at least once. I mean, if that, you know, it doesn't happen all the time. Typically, they go through the process, you know, maybe early on when they're reading the script, they'll say, I don't know about this moment. So you're doing it then. But once you're on set, it's not all the time, typically. If it does happen, I always just do it their way, even if I have no intention of using it. Just to keep the morale high. Because nobody likes to be educated about what they're doing and how they're doing is wrong, you know? So even if I've had some actors have terrible ideas, like the aesthetic choice is just dreadful, but I don't want to tell them that, because if I said, oh, wow, that is dreadful, you have no taste, you have no idea what you're talking about, that's not helpful to anyone. So I just don't even think about that and say, okay, great, let's do it that way.
So you've got 15 people in your crew. There's usually time to accommodate everybody because they're not going to come at you all at once, but usually you can accommodate most everybody what they're saying. Then that's how you do it. You accommodate for the most part, unless you absolutely can't.
Yes, if we're down to, we've got 20 minutes to get out of here, and my camera guy says, oh, let's try this other angle that's going to take us 10 minutes to set up, and, you know, like, well, we got to be out of here, so we just can't. But hey, how about tomorrow? Let's implement that idea into a different scene. And then by then, maybe he's forgotten about it, or, you know, or you get there and there is time and you can do one way. I mean, I've had with Hanuman, when we were working on that film, I said, you know, he had this idea and I said, great, let's shoot it my way first, and then we'll shoot it your way. And then when I'm editing it, I'll use mine. but typically, sometimes you can have surprises. I mean, that's the other good thing about, you know, shooting on, you know, HD and not film, is that you have the luxury and the expense and the time to find out if there's magic. Because even if you think the idea sounds stupid, they might do it and blow you out of the water. It might be such full of magic, you'll be really happy you did both. You know, you never know. You never know.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions, anything else before we go? I just want to reiterate, interrupt me if you do. Filmmaking Confidential is on Audible if you'd like to listen to the audiobook, or it's in paperback if you'd like to feel the butteriness of the cover and look at the words. It's really a lovely book inside. This is the chapter I read earlier. And it's also Kindle.
Great read. It's a great read, I gotta say. Yeah.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, it really is.
Our next topic is, I think, oh, I meant to look it up before we sat down and I forgot. But it's on, if you go to Filmmaking Confidential on the meetup group, you'll see it. It may be Sunday. I don't know. One other thing I wanted to tell you, which some filmmakers know and other filmmakers don't, you never have to have one perfect take. You never have to have the master shot that is perfect from the first second to the last second, because you will end up cutting the scene. Now, if you're trying to do it all in one take, that presents a different story. But typically, once you've done the master shot and you go in for coverage, the majority of your scene is going to be made up of the close-ups and the coverage anyway. So I would just, you know, the first timer starting out, I think, really wants to have that perfect take. And sometimes studios insist on it. But I would just say you don't need one. So why waste the time trying to get one? Unless you just want to see what it's like.
Steve, do you, goes to that. Do you, since you do storyboarding and all, do you eliminate things like the master? I don't need a master here. I'm going to do this, and not waste the time. Because it seems like the studio theory is you do the master, you do the medium shot, you do the over the shoulders, and there are all these things because they don't know what they're going to use, as opposed to someone like you, independent, goes, you know what, this is how I envision the movie, this is my vision of it, and so I don't need that master shot. I'm already in the scene. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does, and I've done it both ways. So I have decided, let's just do, and you know, in fact, I'm sure it's happened where I've done the scene in one take And it was so cool that I decided not to go in and do close-ups. And I just kept it one shot, one take. Even if I had intended to do close-ups. But typically I always do, even if I don't use it. And if I know for a fact that it's a really, really intimate moment and the camera's going to be like this tight on someone's face,
right,
because of the situation in the story or something, then I will only shoot those things, because I'm not going to ever cut back. If it's supposed to be a quiet, intimate moment, I'm not going to show you from across the street.
Yeah, it was interesting because a friend actually was on a shoot and he was explaining, he goes, it was so frustrating. We did almost a dozen master shots and it was so obvious the scene was an intimate scene between the two of us. And it's like, why are we wasting all this time doing this? And they were doing dollies and all this movement. It's like, okay, if that's the shot, then why do you have planned? And I just have thought to myself, well, that makes sense. It seems like a waste of time to spend all that.
It is. I mean, unless you're Kubrick and you're working with Tom and Nicole and you don't have a deadline,
right?
Then it's like, I mean, I don't know.
Unlimited budget.
Yeah, exactly. So I personally wouldn't do it that way because I like being frugal with the money. You know, even if I have $1 million, I'm still trying to get the hotel free.
Right.
You know, it's like I want to pinch every penny I can so that I can use it and throw it up on screen somehow. All right. Well, I thank you all for being a part of this today, and I hope you can join us in the future for any of these Filmmaking Confidential talks.
Thank you.
There's going to be a bunch of really cool ones. And again, my website is stevebalderson.com. So if you ever need any advice, any questions, all you have to do is reach out. I have a contact thing on there and an email and everything. So you can anytime.
Now you're looking at us.
I know. I decided to look at everybody to say goodbye. Instead of talking at no one in the kitchen, I'm going to talk to you guys here right now.
Okay. Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Be well, everybody.
Good night. Bye. Thank you.
Absolutely. See you soon.